Today we have Tony joining us. Tony is the CEO of Versprite and co-author of the process for attack simulation threat analysis. Versprite is an Atlanta-based security services firm assisting global multinational corporations on various areas of cybersecurity, secure software development, threat modeling, application security, security governance, and security risk management. Tony has worked and led teams in the areas of application security, penetration testing, security architecture, and technical risk management for various organizations in utility, bank, government, retail, healthcare, and information services. He has spoken at conferences across 13 countries and 4 continents on this subject matter. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tony to talk to us about threat modeling.
Sounds great. Thanks, Michael. If you can make me presenter, then I'll be sharing some slides and starting the talk. So first off, thanks to you and the University of Michigan for the opportunity to address faculty, students, staff, on those interested on threat modeling. And we're going to be cooking with some pasta today. So hopefully you can see, actually this is the wrong screen. Let me share the right one. And if you can just confirm for me, should be able to, there you go. That should be the screen. You should see what you're seeing. Can you see that in presentation mode?
Yep.
Okay, great. So it should be a big screen that says cooking with pasta.
Correct. Yeah.
Excellent. Sounds great. All right. So let us get started here. Let me go ahead and there we go. So today we're going to talk about something that's really near and dear to what I've been working on for the past really almost 10 years. And this is a framework called PASTA, Process for Attack Simulation and Threat Analysis. It's one of 3 major threat modeling methodologies. We're going to talk a lot about threat modeling. What is it? How do you get started? What's it used for? How is it beneficial to you? Because I'm understanding that many of you might be diving into a professional career in software development and architecture, maybe postgraduate, or maybe you're actually a faculty and staff member and you're doing some of that already. I won't belabor who I am, but I did write this book in 2015. If you are interested in a discount code, feel free to follow me on Twitter, ST0NYUV, or you can also follow the LinkedIn page for Versprite, just keyword search Versprite, which is the company that I started about 14 years ago. If you're a soon-to-be graduate in the computer science or cybersecurity realm, whether it be a master or an undergrad, feel free to also follow Versprite for new and exciting opportunities in the cybersecurity, data privacy, and governance space. So with that, let's go ahead and talk about the agenda. We're going to really talk about the methodology of process for attack simulation and threat analysis. Again, it's based upon a book that me and a co-author, Marco Morana, who used to be a SVP at Citigroup in London, were both major OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project leaders. If you haven't heard of OWASP, please keyword search it, go to owasp.org. Shout out to them and all their efforts, but it is a free, nonprofit, global consortium of cybersecurity professionals that are focused on the betterment of application security. But the methodology is a risk-centric approach. What does that mean? So when you do threat modeling, it sounds like a complicated term, but it's really easy. It lends from military background and it's about modeling your threats. We're going to dissect the stages of PASTA, a risk-centric threat modeling methodology. We're going to go into the quick overview right now, and then we'll go into each of the stages. So you might be asking yourself, well, what makes your PASTA any better than anyone else's framework or approach to threat modeling? So first off, where is PASTA today? PASTA has been adopted and taught at various universities, both in the United States and abroad. The book itself was actually endorsed by the cybersecurity czar of the White House under the Obama administration, Howard Schmidt, who recently unfortunately passed away, but he did write the preface of the book, and his excellent background was a great boost to the credence for a risk-based approach. So speaking on risk-based, the idea when you're doing threat modeling is let me model threats that A, I care about, and B, that are actually going to be impactful. So in the real world, like with various organizations, there's a hamster wheel of pain related to risk management. There's individuals that are just always asking themselves, hey, am I compromised? There's some people that are super happy just not knowing and pushing out the harsh realities of their security risk issues. There are individuals that are in security, that are running security programs that are like, let me just fix problems when they pop up. And then there's people that are constantly in a sheer panic, and they think that any given day is going to be the complete undermine of their organization through some sliver of a security vulnerability that affects their organization. And then there's others that are very, vendor tool happy, where they buy a lot of tools out there. And not to discredit any of the tools out there, but there's major companies, IBM and HP and Computer Associates, et cetera, that have tools, and some of them are very great tools. But there's organizations that their understanding of risk is coming from these tools. So there's a lot. This is the hamster wheel of pain, as I like to call it, because this is how most organizations kind of identify their risk. Now, the methodology of PASTA is a threat modeling methodology that is 7 stages. It is a methodology. So if you do these stages, and underneath each stage, there's different activities that you do, you're doing threat modeling. The first 3 stages of let me get my laser pointer here, because this wouldn't be a presentation without one, right? So the first 3 stages right here of PASTA of this risk-centric approach is about, let me understand, what am I protecting? What does this application do in terms of supporting the business? What is the technology stack of this application? So an example, what is my web application running on? Is it running on Nginx? Is it running on Apache? Is it running on Catalina? Is it running on, Java frameworks? The list goes on and on and on. And then, what is my application doing? So let me decompose my application and see, who is it talking to? What are the interfaces? What are the the different calls that are being made to and from the application? And then the stages 4, 5, 6 are more adversarial. Just say, okay, what are my threats? But let me make them credible, right? Let me research a little bit about the industry that I'm in, the sub-industry that I'm in. For example, you can be in retail, but you could be a retailer that sells health products, or a retailer that sells consumer goods or financial services, right? So there's different threat models depending upon the information that those different retailers. So you almost have to look at the sub-industry that the threats pertain to. You want to dive into what vulnerabilities you might have and what attacks could you actually exercise to see what works. So the reason this is called a risk-centric approach is like stages 1 through 3, why do I care? Stages 4, 5, 6, what could really happen? And then stages 7, well, based upon what's going to really be the most impactful, what do I want? How do I prioritize the things that I want to do? So that is in super, super layman's terms, just to kind of keep it simple. So we talked a little bit about this already, so I'm not going to belabor the point, but let me just highlight some things that are important for all of you as students or faculty, team members, maybe some of you that haven't even heard of PASTA. So we already talked that it's risk-centric. Great. We already defined a little bit of what that is. We'll get into more of that in a little bit. Contextual means, well, how does it relate back to business? If you graduate and you go into the workforce and you work for a multinational company, at the end of the day, your technical role, if as a cybersecurity professional, has to reconcile to a business context. How do you explain the value of what you found as a vulnerability, as a misconfiguration, as a flaw, as a control gap? How do you explain that back to an impact to a product, to a service, to a business model? That is a game changer, and that's gold. You can take it to the bank. It'll make or break whether or not you have really a good career in cybersecurity or an excellent career in cybersecurity. So that was an important thing to kind of bring out. just lost power here, and lost power last night. So we're having some storms here in Georgia, but let me just dive back in if that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let me know if you need me to present the slides or anything.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna just share my screen, and boom, we're there. Okay. So apologies for that in the interruption here. We had power. So where we were, let me just make sure we're in the right spot. And okay. So we were talking about, the kind of an overview with modeling. And if you look at this honeycomb representation, what you're seeing here on the screen is a lot of activities that you do when it comes to security activities. You can look at any one of these little combs, little kind of, sexagons here. And you can see that these are activities that oftentimes are done within the security program. Evaluating third-party libraries and software, a major problem today with supply chain risk. You can go all the way to looking at design architectural requirements, right? And so that's something else that typically, architects are having to really address. Looking at CWEs, which is a MITRE library of weaknesses related to applications, right? So when you scan applications with different types of tools, you get CWEs, which is a common weakness enumeration list of things that are wrong with an application. The point of this representation here is that threat modeling should and can encompass a lot of these things, either in the understanding the model of your application, how it works, how trust can be abused, and also, how to address some of the riskier factors of the application model. So we can spend really all day on any one of these issues, but the benefit of PASTA is that it does look at governance related areas. It does look at what is in your tech stack, the blue area right here. It does understand how does the application work, design, data flow, target API endpoints, what are the actors or application actors, which is basically what is the caller or logical user that is making a call to an application. So this is more architectural, stage 3. Stage 4 right here, the great part is threat, everything threat, gathering threat intel, understanding your enemy, understanding who would attack you, understanding their capability, their means, looking at weaknesses in yellow, looking at and building out an attack plan, right? You want to be able to build on an attack plan so you can attack the application, and then ultimately come up with what are you going to address based upon the criticality to the application. So let's start and dive in. We're going to cover, make some comparisons to other approaches in threat modeling, but this, again, for those that are joining in after the power outage, it's really about the process for attack simulation and threat analysis. So stage 1, 2, and 3, remember, it's about understanding what are we protecting. That's where that business context, that technology context comes in. All right, so the objective here is, number one, is understand what, if we have an application, let's say that you just started, you guys are in Michigan, let's say that you guys work for Ford. Ford recruits you guys to, develop an API, an application programming interface that is interfacing with EV vehicles, Ford's new EV vehicles that are out there. Well, as part of understanding stage 1 and how to apply a threat model to that effort as a programmer, as an architect, you want to first understand, well, what are we leveraging? What should we leverage in terms of frameworks, right? That we should leverage before we begin threat modeling. Let's try to understand what type of countermeasures is there out there from a regulatory sense. I'll just mention that every industry, whether it be utility or automotive, has some level of frameworks or guidelines or standards around security, okay? So with the automotive industry, they have a lot. They actually have a lot, especially with the proliferation of how embedded electronic computing systems operate within vehicles. There's more and more rising standards. So you want to make sure you address those standards. Maybe you look within the company of Ford itself to say, hey, what sort of standards do we have around API security? maybe around the use of tokens, which is a common way to maintain session state in different applications. Maybe what sort of countermeasures do we have based upon where this API endpoint is going to be residing? Is it going to be in Azure? Is it going to be in AWS? Is it going to be in Google Cloud? Is it going to be self-hosted in Ford's IT environment? Things like that. And the reason you begin with this is because this is a stage where I call it like blind threat modeling, right? It's like understanding what sort of preemptive security mitigations do we have as guidance before we build a secure design. All right, so that's really important. The other thing that's really important too is that, is making sure that again, let's go with the example, you're building an API for Ford, you want to understand what's the business objective of that API. So let's say that they say, well, we want to build a world-class entertainment portal where EV vehicles communicate to Ford's infrastructure to pull down the latest content, the entertainment content. You're charging up, you're watching Hulu. You're charging up, you're watching ESPN. You're watching the Lions have a pivotal breakout year or something, right? So you want to be able to understand what is the business objective of what you're building. So here we have some examples on that. I'm not going to belabor it, but understand that there might be objectives in business to ensuring the confidentiality of data. There might be business objectives about establishing a reliable architecture, right? Imagine if you work for a gaming company, as an example. You don't want to basically spend your summer months between freshman, sophomore year, and then, your favorite games are down because of the infrastructure is weak. So things like that. All right. So now let's quickly go into stage 2. So we understood a little bit of stage 1. First of all, how do you even begin with that? What is the output that you have out of stage 1? The output you would have is to try to just have something that says, these are some regulations. If we go back to here, these are some regulations that we're going to use, and you start to list them out. We're going to use SAE version, whatever, standard, whatever, for, the security of hardware devices and vehicles. There's a lot of regulations. There's NIST standards, there's ISO standards that might be applicable. You list them out. Threat modeling for all the students out there is really it's kind of like cooking, which is very symbolic to the pasta name of the framework. You're dealing with ingredients, right? So make sure that you list out what are the things that are external frameworks, internal standards, business objectives that the application is going to support, and then also understand what are the objectives of the application itself. Is it confidentiality? Is it integrity of data? That's super important. Is it availability of system resources? Is it compliance? All of these things can actually undermine the objective of the application's existence. So again, another list. So the output here is this lists. All right, it's that easy. All right. Stage 2 is now let's try to understand, what are we defending? You can't really defend unless you, or even like simulate an attack, unless you know what you're dealing with. So it's really important to understand what's called the attack surface. That's a hot word right now, and it's oftentimes misused. But attack surface in pure technical IT speak is really your tech stack. Okay, what is the application running on? What about any JavaScript libraries that you're using? Are you using Node? Are you using React? Are you using Angular? Are you using a Ruby-based application, Ruby-based web services? Is it a Go-based application? You want to understand these things because the applications depend on libraries. Those libraries get updated not by you, but by the community, or they're updated by an OEM manufacturer of software. So, obviously there's the dependency with a lot of things like DNS, right? Your API has to resolve something for entertainment apps or entertainment hubspot.for.com as an example. Needs to resolve, right? Otherwise, your app that you're building is not going to be able to resolve from the EV vehicle all the way to the API endpoint. Things like that. There might be a virtual OS, that there's some dependencies on the file system. There's some dependencies to some core .NET libraries or some core, Java libraries and things like that. So all those things are part of your attack surface. Understand, and this is one of the major differences of PASTA and other methodologies, is that they don't go into the system OS or the physical maybe firmware or hardware dependencies. So that's also something very important to understand, is that when most people do application threat modeling, they don't really dive into some of these things that I have on here, right? They just stick to software, the software threat model, which is kind of myopic, right? So you can't protect what you don't know. And this is yet another reason, like if you look at other approaches like Stride and you do application threat modeling there, Stride is really not a methodology at all, but we'll go into that in a little bit. But you're just asking yourself as a developer, what can cause spoofing attacks? What can cause denial of service? What can cause elevation of privilege? But you're not really, and it all within the application model, right? You're thinking about your application software that you're writing, and you're thinking about like, oh, okay, well, here is my presentation layer where I have these widgets are making these calls for this content provider to provide images or video, whatever, right? That's what most application threat models are asking, but they're not asking about, dependencies on cryptographic key management systems, if applicable, or a PKI subsystem for public key infrastructure, or other things where oftentimes you might have integrated authentication, right? Many of you know that there's a lot of applications, banking applications even, that use OpenID. You log into one of your favorite sites and then you log in with Apple ID. Do you want to log in with Twitter? Do you want to log in with Facebook, right? This is OpenID architecture for authentication, right? In those types of application models, you still have to understand and what is your attack surface, not necessarily so that you can basically have this huge like macro threat model that is like difficult to do a data flow diagram, but you want to be able to understand what's in scope and what sort of calls are being made to extraneous sources of services and things like that. So, there's a lot of ways. So here's some key recommendations. There's a lot of great tools out there on the network side. If you're dealing with like trying to understand the environment you're running in, you want to make sure that you understand, maybe in a traditional environment, run Nmap. Rumble's a new tool, fairly new, it's a really fast way to fingerprint what you're running in a given environment. Even spidering on web applications, if you're inheriting a project and a lot of people don't know what's running on their website. And there's a lot of, libraries or code that might be running on a website that could be invoked, right? And so it's just important to be able to understand what you're protecting. So even on a website, you want to be able to spider the application and see, what's there. Also, you going more in depth with like proxies and PCAP captures, from a defensive side, let's say that you guys are really interested in understanding the application model by capturing, proxy traffic. Typically when you have web infrastructure and you go to some of your favorite sites, they're load balanced, which means that you come in through, just figuratively speaking here, a pipe, and then there's something basically divides that web traffic into, that something is a load balancer into two different, possible areas where there's multiple forms of web server that can handle all that demand and traffic. Very common for gaming, for example. And so you want to be able to see, if you're at certain points within the infrastructure, again, if you're working for some of these companies, you want to be able to understand, what type of traffic am I getting? Right. It's one thing to build an application and assume that you're getting legitimate traffic, but one thing is to be able to capture a lot of that web traffic and see if maybe you're getting nefarious traffic, right? Maybe you're getting a lot of injection-based attacks. So, the point here is that you want to be able to see what type of resources in your environment could you leverage in order to do some level of capturing to see if there's extraneous calls being done to outside resources and things like that. There's a lot of different tools. There's a lot of reverse engineering tools. There's a framework called Ghidra that's out there for reverse engineering binaries. There's a lot of tools out there, but the point here is that you want to understand, as you're trying to understand your attack surface, a classic architectural model is 3 tiers: web, application, business logic layer, and backend data. And you want to understand what you're running, right? Because all of these different layers could have a vulnerability. All right, so let me go to the next stage here. We talked about what are we running
And we layer that on top of why do we care, or what are the objectives of this application. Now, this is one of the most popular stages that are really agnostic to even PASTA. It's called application decomposition, stage 3 in PASTA. But this is where we do a lot of things called data flow diagramming. And so this might be familiar here. This is really one of the iconic deliverables in threat modeling, is building a data flow diagram. And oftentimes there's a misunderstanding that building a data flow diagram is building a threat model. And so with that in mind, let's take a look at this data flow diagram right here, okay? So here we have an end user logging in with Google. So this is where they're using like kind of like integrated authentication. And so here is so they're logging into, this is a service. So this circle in DFDs typically represents some level of a service that's always running. And so, so there's basically a login with Google here. And then there might be a redirect to an authorization server, because when you're logging in with Google, Google is just saying, oh yeah, that's Michael or that's Tony, but that's not really, an authorization service, right? This is an authentication service, but we're looking for the authorization server to say something back and say, hey, you know what, you're all good. Typically, there's once there's an authorization service that says, yeah, that's okay, then there's an access that's granted back, and then boom, there's some back and forth related to, let me provide some tokens so that you can pass that authorization token back and forth as you make your request into the application. Right now, this is just showing, this data flow diagram is just showing a very simple snapshot of an OAuth 2.0 implementation in a bigger application. We haven't even looked at what data is it touching. We haven't looked at what application services is it touching, right? You could be using this in this fictitious Ford Entertainment API portal that we're building, right? This could be the authentication and authorization model, right? But if you look at this DFD, where are the threats? If you look at this data flow diagram, where are the threats? There's nothing that really talks about the threats. You don't really get a sense of like there is any privilege escalation or arbitrary command injection. You don't get that, right? So again, I really wanted to make clear that, doing a data flow diagram is not the end all be all of simply threat modeling. It is one of many artifacts that are produced. But in this stage of PASTA, again, stage 3, this is one of the outputs that we'll be producing. Stage 2 produced a list of technology what we're working with. Stage 3 is, where does that technology fit into my architectural diagram? So let's talk about some DFD etiquette. So the data flow diagramming etiquette really is, trying to understand and map out use cases within an application. So what you want to do typically as you're using, doing some data flow diagramming is you want to make sure that some of the labels are using like action verbs, that what are the labels should be telling you what is happening between one endpoint to the other. And that you also want to be able to map out what is receiving input and what is producing output, because the receiving input, from a security sense, you want to validate that, right? And if you take away nothing from this presentation, understand that when you do threat modeling, you have to presume a distrust to a caller in your data flow diagram, even if the source of a caller is from the same development group. You have to still do some level of validation. So you do validation on input, you do some level of standardization and standardization or encoding on output, right? Because you don't even trust the output leaving a process that is maybe rendering back data. So from a computer science standpoint, you want to be able to make sure that you're qualifying what is coming out and using a level of standard, because if you don't, then you could be causing problems upstream in the application, meaning going back to the user, or downstream, going further into the application architecture. Typically, you have like these like concentric circles that are meant to represent more of a process, and they typically can interact with anything. You have typically like your rectangles to denote like a caller, or some sort of like entity that's not running a process, but like a caller. So things like that. But concentric circles typically are meant to represent some level of a service, and they can interact with other services as shown here. So here is a quick legend. This is just for those out there that have never even done DFDs, never really built DFDs and things like that. Okay, I'll get to that in a second, Mark. That's a good question. So basically, here's a lot of symbols related to DFDs that you should use. And again, it's pretty simple and self-explanatory. Let me talk about Mark's Allen's questions here. How should businesses such as professional services providers with much client interaction conduct risk mitigation in regard to third-party risk? Okay, that's a great question. I'll just answer it live. And so basically, the professional service firms really need to understand. It goes back to what we talked about in stage one with the threat modeling, right? Stage one of this presentation talked about context. You have to have context with what you're protecting, and that context is going back to the fictitious Ford example. If you guys are all working in Ford as computer science as programmers, and you're building the new entertainment hub that's going to interface with all EV vehicles for tomorrow's wave of EV vehicles for Ford, continuity is king, right? So the question is, how should businesses such as professional services providers with much client interaction conduct risk mitigation in regard to third-party risk? Well, when you're looking at this entertainment hub as an example, right, for this fictitious, like if example that we're using with Ford, we have to understand what third-party components are we running in our application model that is dependent on third-party content providers, right? If you're building an API that's going to like proxy in Netflix content, Apple content, Hulu content, ESPN content, ABC News content, right? You need to understand that third-party risk. What are the threats that could happen through those third parties, right? Some of the third parties that you could actually be getting bad content, right? They have to do high integrity checks on their content. That's their threat model. But your job, the job of a professional service provider is, again, understanding the context. How is that third party in the Ford Entertainment Hub portal that's going to be used to push down content to EV vehicles? How is that going to be validated and ensured for high integrity, right? So hopefully that helps to answer that question. I'm going to just kind of dip into some questions and keep moving on, as I know the power outage caused some delay. So some key guidelines going back to data flow diagramming is you want to be able to understand some of these kind of like assumed best practices in doing data flow diagramming. A process can talk to another process. Usually an external entity like a square doesn't really talk to another external entity. When I talk about external entity, I'm talking about an application external entity. There has to be some level of business logic or process or daemon that is basically brokering what two entities that are static are basically asking of one another. So for example, an external entity might be like a user trying to get access to a data store. Well, the data store needs some level of business logic translation. There needs to be a query done to the data store, typically for a relational database, where it renders that stuff back. So when you're doing data flow diagramming, make sure that your data flow diagram doesn't say user and then have like a back end like database communication. That is at a high level true, but there is a process in between which is actually proxying all of those requests both to and from the database, as an example. Some tools out there that you might want to try out: Threat Dragon and the PyTM Pythonic framework for threat modeling, which is has its own Slack channel, has its own GitHub, so I would check those out. And those are really cool tools for data flow diagramming. Threat analysis. So before we go into threat analysis, let's see what open questions are out. Okay, there's no open questions. Okay. So let's dive into threat analysis. Now is the fun part. Let's throw away our functional hats. You know, we were like, okay, well, what is the why do we care about the application? Let's understand about business context. Let's understand about regulations and things like that. That was stage one. Stage two, what are we working with? What's the tech stack? What are the libraries, third-party libraries that we're running? What are the open source libraries that we're using? What frameworks are we using? Stage two. Stage three, how does it all work together? Who are my callers? What privileges do they have? What is the implicit trust that's going across? Let me go really quick back to here, because I really didn't mention this, and I really wanted to talk about this, especially here in this diagram. These dotted lines are meant to represent a trust boundary. When you're doing data flow diagramming, you have to make sure that you define a trust boundary between components in your application. So in stage three, we look at things like trust and implicit trust. This is another golden nugget here, courtesy of Tony UV. One of the biggest flaws in application design is implicit trust. Okay, implicit trust means that, so if I were to personify Michael and myself as application components, and Michael represents a Ruby web service that's running, and I represent another Ruby web service that's running, and there is an implicit trust that says, oh yeah, Michael's a good guy. I'll ask him anything, and whatever Michael gives back to me, I'm going to roll with it. I'm going to take it into my application, and I'm going to feed it to my data store. But let's say Michael is evil. Well, let's say that Michael's been compromised by, let's say, Mark, who asked the question, right? And Mark is another personification of another application entity. So in threat analysis, what we do is we see what could go wrong and where do we have these implicit trust scenarios where there could be a model of abuse. All right, so let's dig in. First, let's talk about Stride for a second, because many of you probably are going to, if you Google threat modeling, you're going to see Stride out there. Stride is a mnemonic, and it's 6 buckets. The reason I bring up Stride, because it's a threat categorization, really. It just basically says that security threats for an application fall into 6 buckets, okay? Stride was invented a long, long time ago, and it hasn't changed those 6 buckets. So we have spoofing, tampering of data, repudiation, which means I didn't do it, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privileges. That is not the extent of threats that are out there, especially today in 2021, not even at a high level. So if you, and an example that I always like to use is extortion. Where does extortion fall, right? And one of the hottest threats today in cybersecurity is ransomware, which is a form of what? It's a form of extortion. So just that alone really undermines the credence to Stride. It's outdated, and it's easy to use, yes, but it's weak sauce, and it's not going to really be effective if you really want to do a true methodology. So if you want to understand threats, this is what you really want to do. You want to research, right? Humans were given a very strong, powerful mind to be able to research and understand what industry am I in? Okay, let's go back to Ford. I'm using Ford because University of Michigan, Detroit. So let's go back to Ford again. You guys all have jobs as developers at Ford, building the new set of APIs for their new line of EV vehicles. The vehicle has evolved. You go back to the Model T, which many of you may or may not know what that is, but it's the original like Ford, right? Your vehicle, and it was just as a form of transport. Look at the car today. All right, we can watch movies in certain cars. There's a lot of entertainment. We can stream radio, right? We can like songs. There's some level of AI in some of the computerized systems that exist in cars. The car is now almost like an extension of our home, right? There's comfort, there's entertainment, there's all this stuff. So the future of these web entertainment APIs, what you want to do is understand how is the consumerism of automotive driving, how has it changed? What is the behavior? Because criminals are thinking about that. Criminals are thinking about how you're using your vehicle, and they want to be able to, so for example, everyone's taught, don't click on this when you're on a website. You go to CNN.com, you go to Fox News, whatever, and you might see a banner that pops up like, whatever, that's just, adware, I'm not going to click on it. But what about clicking on something in your dashboard, in your panel, in your vehicle, right? That notion of security isn't there yet, and criminals rely on that. So, things that could be of interest to a cyber criminal is sabotaging a vehicle. Another one might be tracking a vehicle. So if there is a use case, for example, in the APIs to do malicious file upload, which can introduce malware into a vehicle through that API service, which is supposed to be pushing like content, sports news, whatever content to the vehicle, it could introduce malware to the vehicle for the purposes of what? Of tracking. I want to track somebody. Let's say I'm the evil actor, I'm the threat actor, and Michael's my victim. I want to know where Michael is every day of the week in his, Ford vehicle. And I want to know where all the University of Michigan students are. And so threat motive is malicious file upload into the APIs that are receiving input. Maybe I abuse some of the parameters there, and I inject a URL that allows the application to download a malicious file and take it within this repo and then redistribute it to the vehicle. And the purpose of that malware, let's say it has some capability for, GSM tracking and things like that, for geo tracking and things like that. So this is where Stride is not adequate. You want to be, this is called threat modeling for a reason. We are charged to model the threats that could happen based upon things that are realistic, right? So this whole slide is about understand what patterns exist. What are the patterns that exist for the industry you're in, the sub-industry you're in, your attack surface, your architecture, going back to stage 3. And so let's look at some quick do's and don'ts. Research, make your own threat intel. Know where your threat sources are coming from, right? There's bad threat intel. And a future attack, by the way, which hasn't really caught on, but a future attack is I want to be able to manipulate people's perception by creating fake threat intel. That's definitely going to happen. And make sure that you tie your threat intel to what you're running in stage 2, and then also how it affects your architecture or how it maps into your architecture in stage 3. Definitely don't use a single source for threat intels. Don't use your competitors' threat intels. Force you to look at GM and say, okay, let me just see what they're doing, because it might be a different threat, a threat motive. An example might be, there might be a corporate hacktivism bounty against Ford versus GM versus Porsche because of, political affiliations of senior executives, as an example. I'm just speaking hypothetically here. So, or vice versa, not to pick on Ford, but I was looking at GM or looking at, Daimler, Chrysler, et cetera, whatever. The point is that there's always a reason why you might have unique threats that pertain to a company. So don't just use your competitor's threat intel as a basis for formalizing a threat library. And that is basically what some of the outputs is to create a threat library, right? Is to be able to say, okay, what are my threats? So you develop a library of targeted threats. It's just literally a list, okay? And then you begin to map those threats to your attack surfaces. What types of threats would be most likely to affect your attack surface? We talked about an API endpoint. We might talk about the actual car vehicle itself. Make sure you keep it industry focused. Make sure you understand the impact of what could happen so that you can map it back to the business objectives of your stage 1. Because at the end of the day, remember, this is a risk-centric approach. You're identifying a threat. Why should your audience care? So ultimately, what will, there's some things that you can do. There's some great frameworks out there this one of my favorite ones is STIX. And STIX is basically a great kind of representation of how to map, different threat actor labels to objectives, to motivations. It's a great exercise for you to look at their framework. When I say framework, it's literally like basically as you're looking at here, it's a mapping. It allows you to basically say, do I have to worry about the activists in my application model, or do I have to worry about the nation state? Right? You go through this and you start to think about, okay, what are their goals, if any? If not, move on. And it might be that you don't have one, but it'll help you to create a threat library for your specific application. All right. vulnerability. So remember, stage 4, 5, 6, we're thinking now like a criminal. This is called the process for attack simulation and threat analysis for a reason. We're trying to simulate an attacker. So what does an attacker do? They want to understand what flaws you have in your application. So as a defender, once you finish building your threat library in stage 4, you want to say, okay, well, how do those threats become more realizable if I have a list of vulnerabilities? So let's say my API for this entertainment hub at Ford has a lot of vulnerabilities in a Java framework that allows for malicious file upload, right? If my threat libraries has a motive of propagate malware to vehicle, that's my threat motive, then it's going to match well to the vulnerability that where I can do arbitrary file upload, malicious file upload, into a product or a library that is responsible for, let's say, file management. Okay, so things like that. Today, not everything, as you can imagine, is homegrown in software development. Oftentimes you're using third-party products, third-party software, open source libraries. So a lot of it is interfacing with components that are already built and written. So we have to understand what is wrong within the application. And it's not just software. We have to understand, what sort of trust exists where it's implicit. One component within the application model trusts another component. That is a design flaw. So there might be weaknesses in the code base, configuration, architecture, et cetera. We have an opportunity to take a lot of very, very popular activities that are done in a security program, like code reviews, pen testing, data flow diagramming, and see what vulnerabilities all of those activities produce, right? So when you're a threat modeler, typically the role that does threat modeling in an organization is called a security champion. It's just a popular term that's commonly used in Europe, and it's gaining some traction here in the States. But typically in a security program, you have people that are already doing all of these activities. They're doing code reviews, they're doing pen testing, they're doing maybe some vuln scanning and stuff like that. So you can rely on those outputs to see, okay, let me look at these results and let me see if they map to the threats that I've listed out in my threat library in stage 4. So under PASTA, what you want to do as inputs, you want to take in a lot of these inputs like dynamic application security test scans. You want to, there's a whole type of products like, Black Duck and Cynic that look at the software composition of where the software composition analysis tool, where basically it says, oh, you're using these 20 other products in your software or in your code. And it tells you whether or not there's vulnerabilities there, right? So that's a way to look at supply chain risk from a technology standpoint. You want to leverage existing services and tools that are finding vulnerabilities, and you want to collect that so that you can build your vulnerability library that maps to your threats. What did I say at the beginning is that threat modeling in a risk-centric form is very contextual. So at the end of the day, do you care about all vulnerabilities? No, you don't, because you don't have time to mitigate under a risk-centric approach all vulnerabilities. You want to really focus on the ones that are going to realize the threats that you've identified in stage 4. That's why it's called a risk-centric approach. It's just like, if I tell you, hey, do you have a pit bull? Do you have a shotgun for your home defense? Do you have a moat around your house with crocodiles? Do you have, double, locks or whatever? You may have some of that, but it just depends where you live and what your risk appetite is for what you're protecting, right? So it just depends on a lot of things. We do that as humans innately. We need to do this the same thing when we're protecting applications as well. All right, so there is a couple of different, so now that we're, okay, so there's a couple. So if we look at some of the OWASP top 10 areas that are common around application security, there's data storage. How are we storing data securely / insecurely? Web application security, authorization models, authentication models. What you want to do is you want to be able to make sure you cover some of these heavy meat areas, these non-negotiable areas, as I like to call it, to make sure that you are addressing vulnerabilities in these areas, because no matter what industry you're in or what the context is, you're probably going to be concerned about how the application is doing in terms of authentication, authorization, session management, business logic, data storage, web application vulnerabilities. These are all like almost non-negotiable areas as you're looking at vulnerabilities. So inputs versus outputs with stage 5 is inputs. What are some what is your technology stack, right? Before you call something vulnerable, you want to make sure you call something vulnerable of something that you're running within your application. And then number 2 is what threats do you care about, because you want to map those threats to the vulnerabilities that you find. And then you want to make sure that the vulnerabilities have a level of criticality that affects the business impact. So remember what we talked about for this fictitious 4 app is that when we have this entertainment hub, if the hub is always down, like let's say that you bought this car as a consumer, and one of the things that was really cool was the fact that you could use Hulu or ESPN Plus or Disney Plus, and you want to watch The Mandalorian, as you're charging, whatever. If it's always down, you're going to be bummed, right? You're going to be bummed. You probably will recommend and say, hey, don't buy this car because it's a dud. It's an entertainment dud. So these are things where you want to be able to kind of correlate to the business impact. And then last but not least, the outputs, make sure that you produce the vulnerability reports, the different tests, and you give that to the next stage, which is attacks. So we got 2 more stages really quick. Here we're attacking what we found to be vulnerable. So this is where we start another very iconic deliverable or image in threat modeling called attack trees. So you basically have different type of attacks, and so what you want to do typically is you have here a threat motive, you have the attacks, and then those attacks might basically be mapped to vulnerabilities. How do you realize if you want to attack the web application, if you want to compromise credit card data, let's say you attack the web application or you attack the user in the browser, but if you attack the web application, you might want to rely on vulnerabilities around SQL injection or insecure crypto for data in transit, things like that. So you want to map the vulnerabilities to the attacks so that now you can establish a blueprint for attacks. At the end of the day, this stage is about building an attack library. And so what you want to do is you want to build a library of this level right here. You already built this level of threats in stage 4, right? And what you want to do is you want to build a library of threats, of attacks that map to your threats. And then from there, you want to correlate the vulnerabilities that you found, right? Sometimes you can put the vulnerabilities up at a higher node, and then you can basically have the attacks underneath that. But basically, this is a good dissection here. You have a threat motive. What is the threat agent? This goes back to the threat intel. Remember that STIX, sort of visual diagram that talked about, who is the enemy? That's very important to know. What is the target entity? What are they after? Point of sale system, point of sale software, logical access into an environment, infrastructure assets. And then ultimately what you would have down here is, if I want to do an attack on the file system access and maybe do a binary install for the purposes, remember, of stealing credit card data, it has to map to a vulnerability. So the next layer down here would be, the vulnerabilities that I found in stage 5. So ultimately, the attack trees is something is a key deliverable. I won't belabor this point, but you basically have different types of attacks that you want to test out. And then you basically, map it to some of the vulnerabilities that you find within the application that correlate again to those attack patterns. And then, what this does in stage 6, where we're at, the attack modeling stage, is it allows you to build a library of attacks that you actually test. So as a pen tester, as a hacker, you can now be like, okay, I built my threat model based upon what I care about, my attack surface, my threats that I've enumerated. Now I want to actually break stuff, right? And then you can break things that actually make an impact against the application, again, based upon your threat model. The last stage is, what are we going to do about it? Basically, that's what it is. It's building countermeasures in code that can help to reduce the overall residual risk. Okay, the risk that's left over. And so we're building upon, again, the prior stages, right? We're building upon context of what we're defending against in stage 1, stage 2, in terms of the attack surface in stage 2, the objective in stage 1, how the application works in stage 3, and also understanding our threats in stage 4. We want to demonstrate, in stage 6, we demonstrate we should have run the attacks that we've correlated to our threat model. And so the case in point is really, what did we find that was vulnerable at stage 5? What attacks would leverage those vulnerabilities, and did they work? And if we came up with a library of like 50 different attacks and they all worked, then the business owners, the product owners, again, going back to the Ford example, if you go back and say, I built a threat model, here's why you should care, here's what we're running, here's how the application works, it shows you understand, and then you go into like, here's what's happening to these types of vehicles or these types of APIs in automotive. And we found these vulnerabilities in our systems based upon what we're running in stage 2. And these 20 attack patterns worked. And they worked in fulfillment of the threat objectives that we defined in stage 4. Then you're going to get listened to. One of the biggest problems in security is that the security professional, no one listens to them. But the thing that is going to make you be heard is your understanding of risk. So understand this formula that residual risk is some level of vulnerability, the probability that the vulnerability gets exploited times the level of threat, the ease of that threat being exploited times the impact, again denoted by stage 1, and then over some level of countermeasures that already exist, stage 1, or countermeasures that you are going to build, stage 7. So it's important to understand that as you basically look at your data flow diagram, you map out the red stuff is like what can happen, right? But the green stuff is like what you're going to do about it, right? And so you want to be able to go through your DFD again and map out the attack patterns that could happen within your architecture to the components that you've laid out, right? We talked about some of the concentric circles meaning a process. We talked about some of the entities reflecting like these parallel bars, like a data source and things like that. There might be implicit trust in this case right here where this could be abused and things like that. But at the end of the day, stage 7 is about thinking about countermeasures that will mitigate some of the attacks. You might be wondering, Tony, where do I get a list of countermeasures? Just one acronym for you is check out the Application Security Verification Standard by OWASP. It has hundreds of mitigation strategies. Another one is the Security Knowledge Framework, SKF, from OWASP. It's an easy to use online database of mitigation strategies for developers and architects. So you put in a flaw, you get the suggested countermeasure. Also, when you go to MITRE.org and you look at CWEs and you look at CAPEX, again, CWEs is a list of weaknesses or vulnerabilities, great to use in stage 5. CAPEC is an attack library, hundreds of thousands of attack libraries. You can also use the ATT&CK framework from MITRE. You can get a list of what attacks you can use in your threat library, but you want to make it correlated to your threats, remember. Don't just pick anything. You want to make sure that you put it together and make sure that they fit an overall threat model, meaning that they support the threats that you identified in stage 4. This is a RACI model. You guys may not know what that is, but basically you might be wondering, like, who does threat modeling, Tony, today? Well, in a major organization, again, like Ford, you have management professionals, you have a project management office, you have business associates, architectural groups, developers, systems engineers, quality assurance people, security operations center individuals, vulnerability assessment team members, pen testers, risk assessment people, compliance people, you have software assurance team members, and then you have you as a threat modeler, right? This basically maps out the activities of what you do in PASTA, risk-centric threat modeling, and who is responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed as a member of the threat modeling activities. Last couple slides here. Basically, this kind of shows how does PASTA get introduced. I mean, there's here's the who, the what, and the when. In a standard software development lifecycle, you're defining requirements, you're designing an app, you're building it, you're testing it, and then ultimately you're going to be deploying it, right? Threat modeling really falls within the define to the testing stage. That's where it kind of lies within. And there's different types of inputs and outputs that are produced. And here we have a quick and very easy depiction of what is the input and output of different things that you capture as you go through PASTA, as you go through the process for attack simulation threat analysis. PASTA is well documented. It's a 7-step process, but you can pick and choose which ones you want to do. It's a maturity model. We basically have mapped this out to OpenSAM, which is the software assurance maturity model, or the building security and maturity model. If you're interested about more of those resources, feel free to, again, follow us on Twitter at Versprite or T0NYUV. Here's just a snapshot of that maturity model. We won't get into maturity models too much here, but a maturity model is basically like a model that shows how you're evolving a certain process, okay? And there's a different scoring system that any maturity model, we're looking at a sample of BSIM here, but you might adopt PASTA, in your own spare time, or maybe if you graduate and you want to do some threat modeling, you don't necessarily have to do all stages or all activities within each stage. You want to do a crawl, walk, run, where what does crawl threat modeling look like, right? It's going to vary by individual and by company and by, what their resources and time allotments have. Some companies, I'll just tell you right now, they're basically saying, I want to do threat modeling in 2 hours. Some companies have more than 2 hours, they might have a week to do a threat model. But threat modeling comes within a software development lifecycle process where you have engineers, architects, and developers that are building an application. And the threat model value is that you want to be able to build this model of threat so that you can tell your engineer, man, our platform is super vulnerable because it's running everything in elevated privileges. Or you talk to the architects and say, there's an implicit trust here that, you're trusting this API call from this very useful API service that's located in Belarus, but we're just accepting every input from it. There's no sanitization, there's no parameter validation, anything. So a lot to talk about. And this is, again, just meant to be an overview on PASTA. Twitter is T0NYUV. Check out Versprite as well. Versprite has on LinkedIn a page that you should definitely follow. We come out with 0-day exploit research papers, a lot on threat modeling. There's a threat modeling ebook that you can download from the website from versprite.com. And again, if you're about to graduate or interested in cybersecurity, interested in threat modeling, we're always hiring, so keep that name handy. We're a global cybersecurity firm with over 200 clients and over close to 15 years of business. So would love to hear from rising students and the new threat modelers of the future. So I appreciate everyone's time. Michael, kudos to you for putting this together. I know it's a lot of hard work. So big round of applause for you, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the faculty, students, staff.
Yeah, thank you for talking, Tony. I think we have time for one quick question. We're just gonna have to keep it just pretty quick. We're running close on time, but we have a really great question here. So when developing threat intelligence, is there a method for finding/probing multiple sources, both to uncover possible threats and also to validate the threats from multiple sources?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's hard. It's definitely hard. The threat intel is difficult because there's so much data. So qualifying sources, honestly, I'm not going to lie, it just takes time. It's what we do is we liaise with other companies, right? Everyone has their own threat intel group. We have a threat intel group, and we're comparing notes. There's a lot more collaboration in threat intel. 10 years ago, there wasn't, because oftentimes when there was a breach, people weren't sharing notes because there was legal implications. If I share notes, and then let's say I share notes after a breach, then if that breach is still under investigation or even afterwards, the corporate entities were concerned about it might show a sign that it might reveal weaknesses of what they didn't do from a legal standpoint, they could get fined. But nowadays, there's a lot more, cross-pollination and threat intel sharing. I think the frameworks have helped, things like running a TAXII service or running a MISP or a Hive server, where there's a lot of sharing of malware, hash values, of indicators of compromise, right? Which is basically like the fingerprint of like what leads up to a breach of some sort. And so that has gotten a lot better. But it's really my suggestion there is to be, some of it is done very well with different types of tools that are obviously commercial grade and paid for, but others are using open source solutions and resources in order to kind of collate threat intel. But going back to threat modeling, the threat intel sources that you kind of collate from different sources really has to relate to your industry. So let's take financial. There's different ISACs out there. There's a FS ISAC for financial threats. There's a healthcare ISAC. There's a utility ISAC for the utility grid. There is an automotive ISAC, and that's just the ISACs. And then there's separate other groups that are looking in and sharing intel. The Interpol comes out with a great, annual cybersecurity, cybercrime report. The FBI has one. There is the PwC has a state of cybercrime report every year as well. The Verizon data breach incident report is a good one, to kind of understand trends there. But those are more macro. There's definitely ways that you can build your own, MISP server instance. You can Google MISP, and that's open source right there. And you can run your own MISP instance, play with that, and then evolve from there into like Hive, Cortex, which is this type of like AI system where it helps to be able to kind of understand and map out commonalities in that threat intel. So it's hard. It's definitely, there's nothing that's clear cut, and honestly, it takes a lot of time and effort. But if you like to play cyber sleuth, it's definitely something to roll up your sleeves and embrace. But it's still hard for a lot of organizations.
All right. Well, that was a great answer. And with that, we're going to have to wrap it up. And yeah, thank you, Tony. I think on behalf of all of us, we really appreciate your talk.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity, and stay safe out there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.